Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This is number 7 in our ongoing exploration of Laura Lewonder's work.
It's been fun, hasn't it?
It really has. If you've been listening along, you know how much we love her insightful take on self-reflection.
Each book is a gem.
And today, we're going deep into Wired and Worn, Overcoming Anxiety in the Digital Age. You can find it on Amazon, by the way, if you're interested.
Be warned, though, it's thought-provoking.
That's Laura's style. We'll break down some key points and try to help you see how modern life can actually make anxiety worse.
And, more importantly, what we can do about it.
Exactly. Right from the start, in Chapter 1, Laura hits us with this fascinating paradox.
The paradox of connection.
Right. We're the most connected generation in history, yet so many of us feel terribly isolated.
Like we're surrounded by people online, but still utterly alone in our own homes.
There's a weird feeling, for sure.
It is. Social media gives us this illusion of connection, but it just doesn't have the depth of real-world interaction.
Sometimes it feels like a poor substitute.
Think about this. Over 60% of young adults say they feel lonely, even though they're spending hours on social media.
Wow, that's a lot of lonely people online.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Have you ever felt that way? Connected online, but lonely in real life.
Definitely. And Laura talks about this fear of missing out, that FOMO feeling.
Ah, yes. It's like everyone else is having these incredible, picture-perfect lives, and you're just stuck.
Makes you feel like you're not doing enough, not being enough.
Exactly. Those carefully curated social media feeds, they're just highlight reels.
Showing only the best, most enviable moments.
Right. We end up comparing ourselves to these unrealistic portrayals, and that just breeds anxiety. We forget it's not the whole picture.
And that's where that pressure cooker analogy comes in, doesn't it?
Mm.
In Chapter 2, Laura describes modern life as this intense pressure cooker.
Where we're expected to excel in every single area. School, work, relationships, everything.
Like we're always on, constantly striving for more.
It's a recipe for burnout. Think about the academic pressure on kids these days.
It's like an arms race. They're pushed to the limit.
Burning out before they even reach adulthood. Then there's the hustle culture in the working world.
Always grinding, never stopping.
Exactly. And then on top of all that, there's this societal pressure to hit those traditional milestones.
Marriage, homeownership, kids.
By a certain age, of course. And social media just amplifies that pressure.
You see everyone else seemingly hitting those milestones, perfectly on schedule.
And it makes you question your own path. It makes you wonder if you're falling behind. Laura uses this example of Ryan, a graphic designer.
I remember Ryan.
He's constantly comparing his career to what he sees on Instagram, making himself miserable.
Makes you wonder, how should we define success? Is it those external markers, or is it something deeper, more personal?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it leads us right into Chapter 3, where Laura talks about these dopamine traps.
Ooh, dopamine traps. Those sound scary.
They can be. You know that feeling, right? When you just have to check your phone, even if you know you should be doing something else.
Like when you're supposed to be working, but you're scrolling through social media instead.
Or when you're having dinner with friends, but you can't resist glancing at your notifications.
Guilty as charged.
Mm-hmm.
But why do we do that? Is it just lack of willpower?
It's more than that. There's actual science at play here. These platforms are designed to keep us hooked.
So it's not just me being weak-willed.
Not at all.
I can't-
It's about how our brains work. They use dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter linked to motivation and reward, to keep us coming back for more.
So it's not just about feeling good, it's about wanting more.
Exactly. Every notification, every comment, it's like a little dopamine hit.
Making us crave the next one.
And the platforms use things like intermittent rewards, infinite scrolling, and social validation to keep us engaged.
It's like a slot machine. You keep pulling the lever, hoping for that next win.
That's a great analogy. And all that stimulation can actually make it harder to focus on more complex, demanding tasks.
Have you ever felt like your attention span is getting shorter?
Like you can't focus on anything for too long.
All the time. I used to be able to read for hours, but now I get distracted after a few pages.
That's a common side effect of our digital habits. And it brings us to a more serious topic, which Laura addresses head-on in Chapter 4.
The rise of anxiety, especially among young adults.
It's almost like a silent epidemic, spreading rapidly.
The numbers are pretty scary, aren't they?
Nearly 1 in 3 adolescents experience an anxiety disorder.
And it's not just kids, right?
The prevalence among young adults has increased by almost 50% in the past decade.
That's a huge jump. It's like anxiety is becoming the norm.
And it manifests in different ways, but it can have a profound impact on people's lives.
It can be debilitating.
In the book, Laura shares stories of individuals like Sarah, who's constantly battling a sense of dread.
And Marcus, whose work pressures trigger panic attacks.
It's important to hear those stories and realize you're not alone in this.
It makes anxiety feel less isolating.
Exactly. And there are a lot of factors contributing to this rise in anxiety. The constant connectivity of the digital age, information overload, the pressure to succeed, economic uncertainties.
It's like we're constantly bombarded with stimuli and expectations.
It takes a toll on our mental health. And what's interesting is that anxiety isn't just a mental thing.
You mean it's not all in our heads?
In Chapter 5, Laura talks about the mind-body connection.
How anxiety can manifest physically.
It's not all in your head, as some might say. Anxiety can show up in your body in all sorts of ways.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, have you ever noticed that you clench your jaw when you're stressed?
I do that all the time. I didn't realize it was related to anxiety.
Or how about headaches, those tension headaches that seem to come out of nowhere?
Yeah, I get those too.
That's your body talking to you. That's muscle tension, a very common physical symptom of anxiety.
So my jaw clenching and headaches could be anxiety related.
It's possible. And then there's your stomach. Ever notice how it gets upset when you're feeling anxious or stressed?
Oh yeah, those butterflies before a big presentation are no joke.
That's your gut-brain axis in action.
Yeah,
Your gut and brain are constantly communicating.
they're like best friends, always chatting.
And when your mind is anxious, your gut often feels it too.
That explains a lot, actually.
It can even contribute to conditions like IBS or irritable bowel syndrome.
Wow, I had no idea there was such a strong connection.
And what about sleep? Does anxiety affect your sleep?
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes I lie awake for hours worrying about everything under the sun.
That's common too. Anxiety can make it hard to fall asleep or stay asleep.
You might experience racing thoughts, vivid nightmares, or wake up feeling exhausted even after a full night's rest.
It's a vicious cycle. Lack of sleep makes anxiety worse, and anxiety makes it harder to sleep.
It's like your internal alarm system is always on high alert, even when you're trying to rest.
Exactly. And in Chapter 6, Laura explores how this anxiety, which might start within us, can actually ripple outward and affect our relationships.
That makes sense. It's not like anxiety exists in a vacuum.
It can strain friendships, romantic partnerships, family dynamics, everything.
So how does anxiety affect our friendships?
Well, one common issue is the fear of being a burden.
Like you don't want to bother your friends with your problems.
People with anxiety often hesitate to open up, worried they'll be seen as too needy or demanding.
It's like they're carrying this invisible weight, but they don't want to burden anyone else with it.
Exactly, which can lead to isolation, even within close friendships.
So you end up feeling lonely, even when you're surrounded by people who care about you.
And then there's the overanalyzing.
Oh, the overanalyzing. I am a champion overanalyzer.
A casual comment, a delayed text message. It can send someone with anxiety into a spiral of overthinking.
Assuming the worst case scenario every time.
It creates so much unnecessary stress in relationships.
That's exhausting.
And when it comes to romantic relationships, anxiety can fuel overthinking and insecurity.
Like you're constantly questioning your partner's feelings, searching for signs of rejection.
It's a tough way to live.
And it can be really hard on the relationship. It can create distance and conflict.
And anxiety can make it difficult to be vulnerable and open up emotionally.
It's like building walls instead of bridges.
And then there are family relationships, which can be complicated enough as it is.
How does anxiety play into those dynamics?
Well, family dynamics can be a breeding ground for anxiety, especially when you add generational differences and long-held expectations.
Like those unspoken rules about how you're supposed to live your life.
Older generations might not fully understand anxiety.
They might see it as something you can just snap out of.
Exactly. Which can be incredibly frustrating for younger generations who are struggling.
It's like you're not being heard or understood by the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally.
And then there's the pressure to succeed that often comes from family.
That feeling like you have to live up to their expectations.
It can feel like you're not just letting yourself down, but your entire family.
And that pressure can be even more intense when there are cultural or societal expectations tied to success.
It's a lot to carry.
It's like a multi-layered pressure cooker.
And another layer Laura explores is how anxiety in parents can actually impact their children.
So anxiety can be passed down from one generation to the next.
Anxious parents can unknowingly pass on their fears and anxieties to their kids through overprotection or by projecting their own worries onto them.
It's like a cycle of anxiety.
Makes you wonder how we can break that cycle and create a more supportive, less anxious environment for ourselves and future generations?
That's a big question, and a great place to pause for now. We'll pick up our deep dive into Wired and Worn in the next episode, exploring Laura's strategies for navigating anxiety and technology, reclaiming our well-being, and building a more resilient future.
There's hope ahead. Don't miss it. So we've spent some time really digging into those challenges anxiety throws our way in this digital age.
From those external pressures to succeed, to how it actually shows up in our bodies and relationships, it's a lot.
It is, but Laura doesn't just leave us with a bunch of worries, thankfully.
That's what I love about her books. She always gives us practical advice, things I can actually do to feel better.
And in Chapter 7, she dives right into that. It's called Reclaiming Your Mind, Tools for Digital Detox.
A digital detox. Sounds intense. Does that mean ditching our phones completely?
Not necessarily. It's more about being mindful and intentional about our relationship with technology.
Because let's face it, most of us are pretty attached to our devices.
We are. But how do we know if we actually need a digital detox? What are the signs?
Yeah, what should we be looking out for?
Laura points out a few red flags. Do you feel anxious when you're separated from your phone, even for a short time?
Maybe a little.
Or do you find yourself losing track of time while scrolling through social media?
Oh, definitely. Hours can just disappear.
And what about focusing? Do you find it hard to concentrate on a task without checking your device every few minutes?
Okay, yeah, all those sound familiar.
That's not surprising, though. Remember, these platforms are designed to be addictive. We talked about those dopamine loops earlier.
Right, the infinite scrolling, the constant notifications.
All designed to keep us coming back for more.
Like we're playing a game we can't win.
In a way, yes. But the cost of this constant connection can be pretty high.
What do I mean?
It can drain our creativity, strain our relationships, even blur the lines between work and personal life.
I've definitely felt that.
Yeah.
So how do we start reclaiming our digital well-being? Where do we even begin?
Awareness is always the first step, Laura suggests, using those built-in trackers on your phone, or even downloading an app to see how much time you're actually spending online.
I'm afraid to even look. But knowing is half the battle, right?
It is. Once you see your habits clearly, then you can start setting boundaries.
Like what kind of boundaries?
Simple things, like designating tech-free zones in your home.
Like the bedroom or the dining room table?
Exactly. Or setting tech-free times, maybe the first hour after you wake up or an hour before bed.
To give your brain a break from all that stimulation.
It's about reclaiming those spaces and times for yourself without the digital intrusion.
I like that. What about when we do use our devices? Are there ways to be more mindful about it?
Absolutely. Laura recommends being intentional with your screen time. If you're going to use social media, decide what you want to achieve before you open the app.
Don't just mindlessly scroll.
Right. Have a purpose and then stick to it. And try replacing those scrolling habits with offline activities.
Things that genuinely nourish your mind and body.
Like exercise, spending time in nature, reading a book, pursuing creative hobbies.
It's about remembering what truly makes us feel alive instead of getting those temporary digital highs.
And when it comes to social media specifically, she suggests a few things. Use those time limit features, take regular breaks, and be really selective about who you follow.
Choose accounts that inspire you, not the ones that make you feel bad about yourself.
It's about creating a positive online environment for yourself instead of one that triggers comparison and anxiety.
It's like curating your own little corner of the internet.
Exactly. And even when you're using your phone, she recommends practicing mindfulness. When you feel that urge to check it, pause, take a few deep breaths.
Resist the impulse.
Ask yourself, is reaching for my phone serving me right now? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
It's about being more aware of our choices and our motivations.
She even suggests trying a digital Sabbath.
What?
A digital Sabbath. It's like a tech-free period of time, maybe a few hours each week, or even a whole weekend.
Wow, that's a big commitment.
It can be, but it's a chance to really disconnect and reconnect with what truly matters.
Reset and recharge.
Exactly. And this idea of disconnecting from the digital world actually ties into Chapter 8, where Laura dives into the power of perspective, changing how we see ourselves.
Because so much of our anxiety comes from those negative thoughts we have about ourselves.
That inner critic that's always whispering doubts and criticisms.
Telling us we're not good enough, not smart enough, not successful enough.
It can be brutal, that voice.
And it affects everything we do, right? Our relationships, our careers, our self-esteem.
It can hold us back from taking risks, trying new things, putting ourselves out there.
Because we're afraid of failing, afraid of being judged.
But the good news is, perspective isn't fixed.
Yeah.
We can learn to shift our narratives and see ourselves in a more compassionate and empowering light.
So how do we do that? How do we silence that inner critic and cultivate a more positive self-image?
Laura offers some practical tools like cognitive behavioral strategies and mindfulness practices.
You mean like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT? I've heard of that,
Yeah.
but I don't really understand how it works.
CBT is a type of therapy that helps us identify and challenge those negative thought patterns that fuel our anxiety.
It's like retraining our brains to think differently.
Exactly. It's about recognizing those distorted thoughts like all or nothing thinking, catastrophizing, mind reading,
Mind reading.
assuming we know what other people are thinking, even though we have no evidence to support it.
Oh, I do that all the time. It's like I create these stories in my head, and then I believe them.
We all do it to some extent. But CBT helps us replace those distorted thoughts with more balanced perspectives.
So it's about questioning those negative assumptions and finding evidence to support a more realistic view.
Laura suggests keeping a thought record. You write down the situation, the thought, the emotion, evidence for and against the thought, and then you try to reframe the thought into something more balanced.
It's like taking those negative thoughts to court and seeing if they actually hold up under scrutiny.
I love that. And then there are behavioral experiments, little things you can do to test out your beliefs.
What kind of experiments?
Well, for example, if you're convinced that you're terrible at making friends, you could challenge yourself to strike up a conversation with someone new
Put yourself out there, even if it's uncomfortable.
and see what happens. You might be surprised by the results.
It's about taking action and gathering real-world evidence instead of just believing those negative thoughts in our heads.
And mindfulness is another powerful tool for shifting perspective.
Mindfulness. Isn't that just about meditating?
It's more than that. It's about being present in the moment and observing your thoughts without judgment.
Not getting swept away by them.
Exactly. You create some space between your thoughts and your reactions to them.
That sounds helpful. But how do you actually do it?
Laura recommends grounding techniques like the 5-4-3-2-1 exercise.
What's that?
You name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste.
That sounds easy enough. I could do that right now.
It's a simple way to bring yourself back to the present moment, to anchor yourself in reality.
And distract yourself from those racing thoughts.
And don't underestimate the power of gratitude.
Gratitude, you mean like saying thank you?
Taking a few minutes each day to write down things you're grateful for can shift your focus from negativity to positivity.
It's easy to forget all the good stuff when we're stuck in anxious thinking.
And finally, Laura stresses self-compassion.
That sounds nice. But what does it actually mean?
Treat yourself with the same kindness and understanding you'd offer a friend.
Be your own best friend, not your worst critic.
Use affirmations, positive statements that counteract those negative thoughts.
I can do this. I am strong.
Exactly. And you can even write yourself a self-compassion letter, offering words of comfort and understanding.
I've never thought of doing that. As we cultivate this more balanced, compassionate perspective, we start to see ourselves and our lives in a whole new light.
It's about rewriting that negative narrative and embracing a story of growth and self-acceptance.
Which brings us to Chapter 9, where Laura talks about finding your tribe, building authentic connections. In a world that often feels so isolating, how do we create those meaningful relationships that nourish our souls?
We've talked about the paradox of feeling lonely, even when we're constantly connected online.
Right. All those superficial interactions don't necessarily translate into genuine connection.
And Laura really emphasizes how important real, genuine connections are for our well-being.
Because we're social creatures, right?
Mm.
We need that sense of belonging.
We do. Those connections offer emotional support, reduce stress, even contribute to longevity.
So good for our mental and physical health.
But building those connections can be tough, especially when anxiety gets in the way.
What are some of the roadblocks that prevent us from forming those deep, meaningful relationships?
Fear of rejection is a big one. And then there's the tendency to get stuck in those superficial interactions, never really going deeper.
Small talk can be exhausting.
It can be lack of time is another common obstacle. And then there's the baggage we carry from past hurts and betrayals.
Those past experiences can make us hesitant to open up and trust again.
They can. But Laura offers strategies for overcoming those obstacles and finding your tribe, those people who truly get you.
Where do we even begin? How do we find those people?
It starts with knowing what you value. What are your core principles? What are you passionate about? What kind of people do you want to be surrounded by?
So it's like dating.
Yeah.
You got to know what you're looking for before you start swiping.
Haha. That's a good analogy. And once you have that clarity, you can start seeking out opportunities for connection.
Like where?
Join groups, attend events, volunteer for a cause you care about. Put yourself in situations where you'll meet like-minded people.
That makes sense. It's about putting yourself out there, even if it feels a little uncomfortable at first.
Exactly. And be open, be vulnerable. Sharing your authentic self, even your anxieties and struggles, can actually deepen connections.
Really? I always thought you were supposed to hide your flaws, put on a happy face.
It might seem counterintuitive, but vulnerability creates trust and invites others to do the same.
It's how we form those real human connections.
So ditch the masks and show up as your true self and be a good listener.
That's important.
Show empathy. Reflect back what you're hearing. Really focus on the conversation instead of letting your mind wander or checking your phone.
Make the other person feel heard and understood.
And don't forget about nurturing the relationships you already have.
Those are the most important ones, right?
Check in with friends and family, celebrate milestones together, express your appreciation for them.
Those small gestures go a long way.
And think beyond your immediate circle. Host gatherings, get involved in your community, contribute to something larger than yourself.
That fosters a sense of belonging and shared purpose.
And even if you struggle with social anxiety, there are ways to manage those fears.
What would you suggest to someone who's really anxious about social situations?
Laura talks about practicing exposure therapy, starting with low-pressure social situations and gradually expanding your comfort zone.
Like baby steps.
Exactly. You can even prepare a few conversation starters ahead of time to ease the pressure of initiating dialogue.
That's a good tip. And remember, rejection is part of life.
It's not a reflection of your worth.
It's a learning experience.
The key is to keep putting yourself out there, be your authentic self, and trust that the right connections will come.
It's about believing in yourself and the power of human connection.
And those authentic connections, those friendships and relationships that feed your soul, are worth the effort. They bring joy, support, and a sense of belonging that makes all the difference in this digital age.
It's a good reminder that we're not alone in this. Okay, ready for Chapter 10. This one really hit home for me. It's called Purpose Over Perfection.
Ah, yes. This is a good one. Laura argues that chasing perfection is a trap, especially in a culture that values achievement above all else.
We're constantly bombarded with messages that we need to have it all, do it all, be it all.
It's exhausting.
And unrealistic. Nobody's perfect.
Exactly. And Laura explains that perfectionism isn't about striving for excellence. It's about holding ourselves to impossibly high standards and tying our self-worth to our achievements.
So it's not about being your best self. It's about being this flawless, idealized version of yourself.
And that's a recipe for anxiety and burnout. She says that unlike perfection, which is driven by external validation, purpose comes from within.
It's about aligning your actions with your values and pursuing goals that matter to you.
And it's not about the destination, it's about the journey.
So it's a shift in focus from the outcome to the process.
And finding your purpose is a personal journey. It's about reflecting on your values, identifying your passions, and thinking about the impact you want to make on the world.
It's about asking those big existential questions. What do I care about? What kind of legacy do I want to leave behind?
And it requires breaking free from those societal pressures that dictate what success should look like.
Like those picture-perfect lives we see on social media, the ones that make us feel inadequate.
Laura encourages limiting social media use, unfollowing accounts that trigger comparison, and focusing on your own unique journey.
It's about creating a more supportive and inspiring digital environment for yourself.
And redefining those traditional milestones of success. Forget about graduating by a certain age, getting married, buying a house on some arbitrary schedule.
Because that's not a one-size-fits-all approach to life.
Exactly. Define success on your own terms, based on what truly matters to you.
Shift your focus from the outcome to the process. Instead of obsessing over the end result, embrace the journey, the learning, the growth that happens along the way.
And celebrate those small wins. Find joy in the everyday moments.
It's the little things that matter.
Laura shares some inspiring stories in this chapter about people who've embraced this philosophy.
Like Emily, the athlete who found her purpose in coaching after an injury, forced her to redefine what success meant to her.
And Carlos, who left a high-paying corporate job to start a sustainable clothing line, finding more meaning in pursuing his passion than chasing a traditional career path.
It's so empowering to hear those stories. They remind us that fulfillment comes from aligning our lives with our deepest values.
And Laura gives us some practical tools for embracing purpose. She talks about self-compassion, using the 5 whys technique to uncover the deeper reasons behind our goals.
The 5 whys.
You keep asking why until you get to the root of the issue.
Interesting. And she also talks about embracing failure as a teacher.
Because failure is just feedback.
It's an opportunity to learn and grow.
She even suggests creating a purpose map to visualize your values, passions, and skills.
Like a roadmap for your life.
Exactly. And letting go of perfection can be incredibly liberating. It frees us to take risks, be vulnerable, and pursue our passions without the crippling fear of failure.
It's about recognizing that imperfection isn't the opposite of success. It's a necessary part of the journey.
And that shift in mindset can lead to a life that feels authentic, meaningful, and truly fulfilling.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here.
From the challenges of the digital age to the importance of self-awareness, connection, purpose, it's a lot to digest.
It is. But where do we go from here? How do we put all of this into practice?
Yeah, how do we build a life that can withstand those inevitable bumps in the road?
That's where Chapter 11 comes in. It's called the Resilience Blueprint. And it's all about developing that inner strength, that ability to bounce back from setbacks and thrive even in the face of adversity.
Resilience. That's a quality I admire in people,
It's essential for navigating life's challenges, big and small.
especially with all the added pressure and anxiety we're facing these days. Exactly. But Laura stresses that resilience isn't something you're born with. It's a skill you can cultivate.
So it's like a muscle you can strengthen with practice.
Exactly. It's about learning to manage your emotions, adapt to uncertainty, and find solutions even under pressure.
So it's not about avoiding challenges. It's about developing the tools to handle them effectively.
And resilience is good for us on so many levels. It reduces anxiety, boosts confidence, strengthens relationships, helps us lead more fulfilling lives.
Sounds like a superpower. But how do we build this resilience? What are the key components of Laura's blueprint?
She outlines 6 pillars: self-awareness, emotional regulation, social support, adaptability, problem-solving skills, and a growth mindset.
6 pillars. That's a lot to remember.
It's a comprehensive approach, but it all starts with self-awareness. We've talked about this before, but it's really the foundation for everything else.
Okay, remind me again. How does self-awareness relate to resilience?
Self-awareness is about understanding your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, knowing your triggers, identifying areas where you might need to grow.
So you need to get really honest with yourself about your patterns and tendencies.
Tools like journaling and reflection can be helpful here. Ask yourself those tough questions. Why am I feeling this way? What's triggering this reaction?
It's about digging deeper and getting to the root of those anxieties and behaviors.
Once you have that self-awareness, you can work on emotional regulation,
What's that?
learning to manage your emotions effectively, even in stressful situations.
Because anxiety can often feel like our emotions are in control, not us.
Laura offers a range of techniques: deep breathing exercises, mindfulness meditation, even the simple act of naming your emotions to take away some of their power.
It's about finding what works for you and practicing it regularly to build that emotional resilience muscle.
And then there's social support. We've talked about how important relationships are, but they also play a crucial role in building resilience.
So
Strong social connections act as a buffer against stress. They provide encouragement when you're facing challenges. It's about having people you can turn to for support, advice, a listening ear.
knowing you're not alone in those tough moments.
And building those connections takes effort. Reach out to friends and family regularly, join groups that interest you, and don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it.
It's about creating a network of support that can help you weather any storm. What about adaptability? Life is full of surprises, so how do we roll with the punches?
Adaptability is essential for navigating those unexpected twists and turns. It's about being flexible, open-minded, and willing to adjust your plans when things don't go as expected.
I'm not very good at that. I like to have things planned out, and it throws me off when things change.
It can be tough, but Laura encourages us to reframe challenges as opportunities for growth.
Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Ask, what can I learn from this experience?
It's about finding the silver lining and using those difficult situations to become more resilient and resourceful.
I like that perspective. What about problem-solving skills? We all encounter roadblocks in life, so how do we deal with those effectively?
Problem solving is about approaching those roadblocks with a clear head, brainstorming solutions, weighing your options, and taking action.
It's about feeling empowered to take control and find solutions, rather than feeling helpless and overwhelmed.
Exactly. And finally, Laura emphasizes the importance of a growth mindset.
What's a growth mindset?
It's the belief that our abilities and intelligence can be developed through effort and learning.
So it's not about being naturally gifted or talented, it's about believing that you can improve with practice.
Exactly. It's about seeing challenges as opportunities to learn and grow rather than threats to your ego.
I love that quote. I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work.
That's a perfect example of a growth mindset. Replace those fixed mindset thoughts like, I can't do this, with growth mindset affirmations like, I can't do this yet, but I can learn and improve.
It's about embracing the journey of learning and growth, knowing that we're not perfect, but we can always strive to get better. So Laura's resilience blueprint gives us a lot to work with. But how do we actually start putting all of this into practice? Where do we begin?
She starts with setting realistic expectations. You don't have to be perfect to be successful.
It's about letting go of that pressure to achieve some unattainable ideal and just focusing on making progress step by step.
And practicing gratitude. Taking time each day to appreciate the good things in your life can shift your focus from negativity to positivity.
It's about focusing on what you have instead of dwelling on what you lack.
She also suggests creating a personalized resilience toolkit,
What's that?
a collection of strategies you can rely on when things get tough.
Like a first aid kit for your mind.
Exactly. This might include breathing exercises, affirmations, contact information for trusted friends or therapists.
So it's about having those coping mechanisms readily available whenever you need them.
And remember self-compassion. When you face setbacks, treat yourself with kindness, just as you would a friend going through a rough patch.
Don't beat yourself up for mistakes.
And celebrate those small wins. Recognizing and acknowledging your progress, even those tiny accomplishments, can boost your confidence and keep you motivated.
Give yourself credit for those small steps forward instead of always focusing on the end goal. But what about when those inevitable setbacks hit us hard? How do we deal with those moments?
When those tough moments come, Laura offers strategies for dealing with them gracefully. The first step is accepting reality, even when it's unpleasant.
It's about acknowledging what's happening, even if it sucks, so we can start moving forward.
Right. And she introduces a technique called ABCDE, a CBT-based method for reframing negative thoughts after setbacks.
ABCDE. That sounds complicated.
It's actually pretty simple. You identify the adversity, the belief that arises from it, the consequence of that belief, dispute that belief with evidence, and then energize yourself with a more constructive thought.
Wow, it's like taking those negative thoughts to court and putting them on trial.
I love that analogy. And remember, professional support is always an option. Therapists, coaches, or support groups can offer guidance and tools for building resilience.
Asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
It's about knowing you don't have to go it alone. Laura also shares stories of individuals who embody resilience, like Elena, who found strength in her grief after losing her father, and Marcus, who rebuilt his career after facing bankruptcy.
Those stories are so inspiring. They remind us that even in the darkest of times, we can find the strength to carry on. But what are the payoffs of all this work? Why bother with all this resilience building?
The rewards of resilience are profound. It brings emotional freedom, greater confidence, and a deeper sense of meaning and purpose.
It's about feeling empowered to face whatever life throws your way, knowing that you have the inner strength to overcome challenges and come out stronger on the other side. So we've explored all these challenges of modern life and especially the impact of technology on our well-being.
But we've also talked about those powerful tools we have, like self-awareness, connection, purpose, and resilience.
As we wrap up our deep dive into Wired and Worn, I'm really curious about what Laura sees for the future.
That's what she tackles in the final chapter, aptly titled The World Ahead.
It feels hopeful, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Like we can actually create a better future.
It does. It's not so much a set of instructions, but more like a call to action, an invitation to build the world we want to live in.
Both for ourselves and for the generations coming after us.
Exactly. Laura reminds us that the world ahead, well, it's going to be shaped by how we choose to respond to these challenges we've been talking about.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed, right? With all the constant change and information overload.
It is. But we do have the power to navigate it all with intention and purpose.
It's about focusing on what we can control, like our thoughts, our actions, our relationships.
And letting go of the things we can't.
Easier said than done sometimes, but I get it.
And she really emphasizes that this isn't a solo mission. We're all in this together.
Our individual choices, they have a ripple effect.
They do. They impact the people around us, our communities, the world.
It's like that idea of collective well-being. When we take care of our own mental health, we're contributing to a healthier society as a whole.
I love that thought. And Laura leaves us with this incredibly powerful message. You are more than your anxiety. You have the power to rewrite your story. You are not alone.
It's so easy to get lost in the day-to-day anxieties and forget that we actually have the power to create change.
We do, and she urges us to keep the conversation going. Talk about your experiences, share these insights with others, advocate for a world that prioritizes mental health,
It's about breaking down the stigma around mental health and creating supportive communities.
making sure everyone has access to the resources they need to truly thrive.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Wired and Worn, what are your biggest takeaways? What will you carry with you from this book?
The idea of purpose over perfection really stuck with me. Letting go of that need to be perfect, it's so freeing.
It allows us to embrace our imperfections, take risks, and actually enjoy the process.
For me, it's a game changer. And it connects to that idea of redefining success on our own terms.
Not by some external measure, but by what truly matters to us.
Exactly.
I'm also really inspired by Laura's focus on building resilience. Life is full of ups and downs, and having those tools to navigate the tough times gives me a sense of peace.
It's not about avoiding challenges, but about knowing we can handle them.
Wired and Worn really does give us a blueprint for not just surviving, but thriving in this digital age.
It's about reclaiming our well-being, building those meaningful connections, and creating a world that's more compassionate and fulfilling.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I highly recommend this book to anyone who's feeling overwhelmed by the pressures of modern life.
It's a must-read.
It's practical, insightful, and ultimately hopeful. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, everyone.
Until next time.
Take care and keep exploring.